Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver real-world leadership wisdom from the front lines of business. I'm your host, Billy Duren, CEO, curious learner, and passionate student of people and performance. Whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000, this show is your go-to resource for creative insights that drive results and build people. Whether you're already in the CEO chair or you're just beginning your journey, this isn't theory, it's the nuts and bolts. Let's go to work. All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren. I'm excited to welcome into the meeting room today, Dr. Stacy Wellborn. Stacy is a serial entrepreneur. Stacy, I love that line. And strategic business consultant who bridges academic theory and real-world application. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, and by the way, Dr. Wellborn is also a professor and program director for digital marketing and strategic communications at Spring Hill College. So we have a professor in the meeting room. I think this is the first professor that we've had in the meeting room today, so I'm already a little intimidated.
Oh, no need to be. It's an honor.
So today, Stacy, I'm so glad that you agreed to be a part of this, because I love exploring the idea of what you're able to teach in the classroom, and then because you're doing it outside the classroom, how you're making that connection. So how would you say owning your own consulting business in the marketing space and then going back to the classroom and teaching this, how has that helped shape who you are as a professor and as an entrepreneur?
Well, I would say both shape both, right? So it seems like a lot. Sometimes people are like, how do you do all of this? Well, because I love it. I love them both. And being in the classroom and being a professional outside of the classroom I believe makes my students' experience better, because I can bring real world experience into the classroom. So I can say, here's the theory about the 4 Ps of marketing, and here's what we talk about and what you need to know. But let me tell you how this works in the real world. You know, and every time I'm teaching, I'm doing that. Here's what the book says, and here's what I'm telling you happens in the real world.
So when you're talking to your students and it kind of dawns on them that you're actually doing it out there, have you seen this light go on for them going, oh, here's somebody with real credentials that actually knows what they're talking about, that there could be some idea that professor may hadn't done it, so they really don't know? Is there maybe a disconnect in that?
Well, professors do get a bad rap in that regard, because the traditional professor route is that you go to school from undergraduate, graduate, PhD, and you go straight into teaching. That is a traditional model. Mine was different because I came to teaching later in my career and didn't start my doctoral program until my mid-40s. So I come at it from a very different perspective. So both are good perspectives, and certainly those who have a more academic perspective have more of an academic foundation. I have more of a real world foundation, so that's what I bring to the table. I do think my students resonate really well with that, because I can say to them, let me tell you about something I'm working on right now and the struggle I'm having with this problem, and let's talk through it from the perspective of the way the book says or the theory says it should work. Let me tell you how this is actually working.
You know, we've actually had 2 guests on our podcast from Praxis, and the word practice means putting theory into practice. So they are a research firm, and they do all sorts of deep dives in research, and then they take that research and they apply it in the workplace. And it's fascinating, because you're actually doing the exact same thing. You're doing the opposite when you bring something into the classroom and say, hey, we're having this challenge out here, throw it out into the class and see them work through that issue. So, you know, and part of the challenge for me, thinking about teaching leadership in concept without them being outside the classroom, and I know you do some work projects with them, how do you come to the place with them about the dynamics of leadership outside the room? I mean, because leaders wear a lot of different hats, and when you're a student, you kind of have your student hat on. So how do you sort of simulate that, if you will?
So I also want to clarify, I teach really because we're a small school, we can teach multiple subjects. And since I love multiple things, I teach marketing and I also teach entrepreneurship. So we started an entrepreneurship degree program at Spring Hill about 4 years ago. And I have built that program and am seeing a lot of interest in this generation in entrepreneurship as a major, which we can come back to that. But through teaching both of those subjects, and entrepreneurship is very real world. There is theory and there's lots of research in the background of it as well. Marketing tends to have more. That's a longer, from an academic side, it's a longer history of research. But regardless, both topics what I try to do is bring in guest speakers. I want them to come in and say, here's what I'm dealing with. They, because it's just like, kids won't listen to mom and dad, but they'll listen to the grandma, right? If I bring in a guest speaker who's living what we're talking about, it has a greater impact. I take students out on a tour. In fact, I think you know this, but several years ago, I was teaching warehouse management and we did a tour of threaded fasteners. And it was so awesome for them to see the real world, because also in theory, we talk about all these robots and these perfect warehouses and how all these robots are going to do all this warehousing stuff. And we went to threaded fasteners and it's rows and rows and rows and boxes of stuff that people have to go pick. And for them to see what it takes to run a warehouse, that's a lesson I can't teach in a book.
I had an emerging leader not related to our business step out into our warehouse one day, had never been in a warehouse before. I think that he's been in the classroom and had never stepped into the warehouse. And I mean, I just saw this fascination with all this stuff that we have, because when you see all that stuff, if you've been in the classroom, you start thinking about packaging, warehousing, picking orders, inventory control, all these different things in the model, the business model. But I want to come back to entrepreneurship just for a minute, because that seems like this narrow sliver of coaching and talking about becoming an entrepreneur. Walk me through that a little bit. So how did that class come to be, or how did that lane come to be, and as far as an instruction piece?
Well, I've been an entrepreneur for as long as I can remember. I mean, I a funny story. My fifth grade, remember back in fifth grade, you had to write a biography about somebody? I wrote my biography on Mary Kay Ash, who started Mary Kay. And so 12 years old, learning about entrepreneurs. Fast forward 40 years, whatever, I love entrepreneurship, and I want more young people to get a foundational knowledge and understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And there is an increased interest in entrepreneurship. Post-COVID, this young generation in so many ways has seen that they don't want to rely on a corporate or government job, which can be that rug pulled from them at any point. But if they can have their own business, whether it's a side hustle or primary hustle, they can have control of their own destiny. And that is some of the trends happening in this younger generation, as well as others. But we need to have that foundational knowledge in entrepreneurship. And so I basically did the research and pitched it to the academic committees at Spring Hill, and they said, okay, let's do it.
Well, I love that word, side hustle. My runway's getting shorter, so I'm looking for some side hustle at my post-threaded fasteners career, but my wife quickly told me my side hustle is going to be being wherever she's at. That's going to be my side hustle going forward. But I love the idea, though, that you're talking to your students about, instead of this idea of, hey, I got to get done with college, I get my degree so I can get a job, as opposed to, I got to get finished with this, I got to learn how to be an entrepreneur so I could start a business. I mean, that is a huge shift in thinking. If we can get the young generation, the Gen Zs that are coming through your classroom these days, to have that mindset, even coming to the workplace with that mindset, how can I have that entrepreneurial spirit even inside the business? Because I begin to see things like an owner.
That's right.
In our company, being an employee-owned company, it's not metaphorical. We are owners of the business, but how they can even come out of the classroom with this idea of, I can own this issue and help make this better, and sort of create that entrepreneurship even on the inside of the business.
Academically, we would call that intrapreneurship.
Okay.
Instead of entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship. So intrapreneurship is just as important. And so I get parents who will ask me, well, why should my child major in entrepreneurship? They need to get a job. I think being an entrepreneurship major will make you the most marketable employee in the future, because you are going to think like an entrepreneur. You're going to think like an owner. You're going to think about problem solving. You're going to think creatively. You think with curiosity. I
can barely say entrepreneur. Now you've got me going on another word, intrapreneurship, creating from within. So I love that. So I'm now distracted, but I'm going to come back to the next question, because I was thinking about this idea, because you're talking about marketing, entrepreneurship, you're teaching and coaching leadership. When you think about a young person who's moving into their first job or kind of advancing in their career, and they hear this opportunity is to say, I'm going to be the manager. So there seems like there's a shift in the, I don't even know if you'd call it in the industry. There's a shift out there that's moving away from that word manager into more of a leader. But we kind of define that as managers manage a process, but leaders lead people. So how are you kind of slicing and dicing those terms?
Well, that's a great question. And I completely agree with you that that's the difference, process versus people. And I think undergraduate education teaches people process. I'm not sure that we do a great job of teaching people. I will say, I think one of the benefits of being at a Jesuit college like I am at Spring Hill College is we are liberal arts and we are Jesuit. And a lot of our foundational education is how to think, how to be in the world with others, how to be mindful of others. And those are leadership topics, right? So when we talk about it in theology or philosophy or ethics, we're teaching leadership through all of our classes. Now I don't teach the management classes, but our management professor is a leadership scholar. That is her area. So that's all she does is talk about leadership and management. But all of us teach leadership. That we all should. If we aren't, we should, Yeah,
and I certainly don't want to downplay or bring some, negative connotation to the word manager, because managers are important, and how we manage and build processes so that they can function consistently.
Totally.
Those are hugely important part of our business. So I don't want that to sound like that I'm speaking negatively about it, but there is a difference. There is a difference in managing a process versus leading people. We have a lot of individual contributors at our company that are just very dynamic at what they do. And we have built-in training modules for them to continue to get better. And I would never want to take away from that. But I'll tell you, I have probably overemphasized leadership to the point where I probably need to lean back a little bit and help continue to build those models for training the individual contributor, and also leaning back and looking and making sure our processes have good oversight with good quality managers leading those processes. So when you look at the practical leadership habits you develop running your own firm, what is something you wish you'd have found out sooner?
Well, gosh, I wish that my husband tells me I'm a Pollyanna, but I like to think I'm a glass half full, and I think everybody is good. And I probably have been burned by that a couple of times. And certainly as an entrepreneur, I've had partners in the past that just didn't work out because I trust and believe the best in people. So maybe that lesson to come sooner would have saved me some heartache.
Yeah, that trust but verify
correct
kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
People probably would say I'm a Pollyanna too. I'm one of those who trust first. Right. Until you give me reason not to, I lead with trust first, and I've been burnt as well. So one of those things from what I wish I would have learned sooner is not be surprised about things for me, because things surprise me. But once you think you've heard it all, something else will come along. But I generally want to believe that people are good and they're doing the right things. And my experience has been so wonderful when it comes to that I'm just going to stay in that lane. I'm going to keep trusting people, and I'm going to get burnt. But it's interesting because you have a lot of experience on both sides of this. How would you communicate that to your students? So they're coming out into the world now. How do you give them that trust but verify advice or counsel?
Well, I share my stories, certainly. But the other thing I was just thinking as you were saying that is the other lesson that I want my students to learn earlier than possible is how to deal with failure. Because so many of them are coming up through high school, and some of this was the previous generation, and it's a little less so now, but the whole everybody gets a trophy process, whatever that was that we did to those millennials, the Gen Z don't have that as much, but I do still see people who have had so much success. Now I'm in a certain environment where I have pretty successful students. They're in college, and they have their benefits in their life, but a lot of them haven't had failure. And that's something that I, through my entrepreneurship program specifically, am teaching them failure early and often. You've got to learn how to deal with failure, because when something goes wrong, it's how you react to it that's more important than what actually went wrong.
Yeah, the idea that I'm thinking about as you were talking is that you're going to invite somebody into the workplace that's never been told no.
Right.
And then how do I respond to no? Because if I react to no, then I'm giving away my, it might be emotion, whatever it might be, but responding and learning how. I'm not sure that there's anything more important than for us to teach our young folks that are coming up through that everything's not going to go right, and learning how. That's great. Learning how to actually, one of our guests early on, Rebecca Gray, talked about this idea of failing fast, because it's a lot less expensive if you fail fast. If you prove this isn't a good idea, or kind of close down that pursuit of something that's going nowhere, how beneficial that can be to our companies. So you teach the entrepreneurial opportunity. How do you talk to your students about vision casting as part of a leadership skill and sort of turning I'm an idea person. I'm just constantly thinking of ideas, but teaching them how to take an idea to an executable plan?
That's exactly what we do. So two things happen. This is actually interesting when you talk about that. One is I have students that have vision and they can see the future and they have great ideas and they have no idea how to get there. That's easy because I can say, okay, let's start at step one and let's practice. Back to that word you said earlier. Let's take tiny steps. Let's do tiny experiments and figure out if this idea is going to work. So backing it down from the big picture to step one, step two, step three, testing, experimenting, getting feedback, talking to actual customers. Because if your customers don't care what you're selling, then you don't have anything to sell. So we got to talk to customers early. So that's what I do there. I will say the other interesting thing is I do have some young people, students who can't really envision the future. And so that's a different problem, is to get them to think about the future. So I'm also doing that, saying, okay, let's envision what the world looks like in 10 years. What could be a problem in the future? Well, how could you solve that problem in the future? And getting them to think bigger than their immediate world, that they're a freshman in college or a senior in college, whatever it is, think beyond where you are now.
Do you see your students naturally navigating to each other to do team think, or do you see them staying in their individual lanes trying to solve it by themselves?
100% the latter. They want to just do it themselves. They don't want to have to talk to anybody. They don't want to work in teams. They hate team projects. Every college student I know, you can ask any of them, they hate team projects. I'm like, I'm sorry, life is a team project. So get used to it.
I mean, I'm just thinking that this would be a change the world moment for us to take on this idea of to get out of that individual lane. I mean, if we really want to change the world, it is going to have to start with some sort of messaging around this, because I was writing down as you were talking, concept people and execution people. Mm-hmm. They're two different people. Mm-hmm. They're two different personalities. Mm-hmm. I am not an executioner. Mm. I am a concept thinker.
I hope you're not an executioner.
No, but, well, yeah. I mean, if you gave me 1 through 10 steps, I may start at 8, and I'm never get to 1. So I just don't. My brain doesn't work like that. But there are people who love to take an idea and build and map out a plan where the person who's conceptually moved on to something else. Mm-hmm. So how do we bridge that gap? I mean, I think you're right. Life is a team sport, and coming to understand that. And maybe as they come into the workplace and begin to fold in, they can see some of that. But even still, I think our workplaces contribute to the same problem. If we put them in their cubicle and they're never contributing back and forth, but we work very hard at trying to pull people into conversations, team building, those ideas of your voice matters in this room, your voice matters in this business. You're one of the owners. So why would we ever do that? So we call that alignment. How do we get the concept thinker to the doer, getting them on the same page, getting them in the same room? You know, we just had our podcast at AI that Don Monaster was on, and we're creating an AI task force to look over some different things that are coming in our business. But that's another way to throw some of those individual contributors into a team. And I mean, they're very dynamic by themselves, but when you put them all together and them pulling in the same direction, I think it adds a whole nother element, another dimension to success. So how do you simulate that in the room? Do you continue to just force them into the team idea, drag them kicking and screaming?
Yeah, basically. Keep giving them team projects, and I switch it up a lot. I give them different types of projects. I switch up the groups. I do short term. I do long term. I mean, that's the real world, right? You are going to be in and out of group projects. You're going to stay in some for a long time. And then the other thing I do, I know you're a fan of personality tests and the DISC and the Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. So I try to bring some of that. If I'm going to do a longer term group project, I will start with some of that work, either the DISC or the Enneagram or even Myers, old school Myers-Briggs, because most of them haven't been exposed to that. And so I then have a whole conversation about how do you manage a team? How do you communicate as a team? You need to agree as a team how you're going to communicate. Like, pick the tool, whatever it is, you guys have to figure out as a team how you're going to communicate. I don't care if all the teams don't have to use the same strategy, but your team has to pick a way that you're going to communicate with each other. And then we can start to build teamwork.
So when the first time I did one of those, it was a very simple I think it was Gary Smalley, the animal. It was the golden retriever, the lion, the beaver, and the otter. So it was something that we did kind of as a marriage exercise. It was comical because Tracy and I are complete opposites, which, created a whole room for discussions. But I remember the first one we did in the company and how our group was kind of fascinated by the information and almost as if this is a little weird that this test identified me so well. But the other part of that was that some of the team that come alongside them and said, this is you. This is absolutely you. Because, you might point out, for example, one of my lowest scores in the Clifton Strengths, my number 34, the last one, was focus. Oh. And every person, dialed right in and said, that's absolutely correct. But when your students are seeing this, what does that look like when they're looking at their tests for the first time? Is it revealing? Is it something that they kind of embrace, or what's that been like?
Similar reaction to the, oh my gosh, this is reading my mind, and then also the, oh, this explains my roommate or my partner or whatever it might be. And so I get positive feedback from them. I do have to remind them often in the process. Remember back when we did that test and that person had this personality and you have this personality. So how can you work together to their strength? Like if you're the team leader and that person's got this personality, how can you use that to your benefit? And so just like you do in a work environment, I do that in the classroom.
So what would you say to the CEO that's listening that may have never done this before? And that maybe I don't believe in that junk. But what would you say to them if they've got a team dynamic, and how you would see that be as a benefit to that owner or CEO that may not have done this before? What would the benefits be from your perspective?
Well, number one is just insight into yourself and to others. And the more that we can understand ourselves and understand others, then hopefully the better communication and teamwork that we have. The advice I would have to someone who's nervous about it or not as familiar is to hire a consultant to come in and be a third party to administer and teach the group about the test. There's so many of them. They're all research-based. They're, coming from a good place. Now, there's some crazy off-the-wall stuff too, but all the ones we've mentioned are all well-researched, well-tested. And I think that if someone hasn't done that with their team, I would recommend it because I think that the team will be better for it.
We just had a DISC assessment, and we had a coach come in and spent 4 hours with our senior leader group, and it was fascinating. And it was interesting though, because I've done a lot of these, and through the course of the session I kind of moved from how people hear me, and I sort of transitioned in the meeting to how I hear people. I was looking at it differently. So it was just I don't know, it's kind of like the light finally went off for me on how, because I was looking at one direction on this test, but I began to see it as how I was hearing them. But very interesting to me. So we are here with Dr. Stacy Wellborn. We're on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company with a mission to create value in and for the people we serve. If you're interested in learning more about our people-centric culture or need a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Stacy, I've called you Stacy for so long. Now you're Dr. Stacy Wellborn. Now you're Dr. I don't know to call you Dr. Wellborn, Dr. Stacy, or can I still call you just Stacy?
Just Stacy.
Okay. I'm so happy about that. So, Stacy, we've been talking about influencers, and that word influencer, one of my favorite, John Maxwell says that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. We've quoted it often on the podcast. But the word influencer's changed. It means something different now. And we are in this world of immediate information. We had to have it right now. There's no waiting. How do you believe that this instant fingertip information for anything I want to know has changed our society?
Well, go on and bring out the big questions, Billy. I mean, we are in the age of influence, and I think it is interesting. It's gone from a verb to a noun. And now all of a sudden we have influencers who are doing influencing. And fun fact is we actually just at Spring Hill College this fall are launching a new degree program that is called Digital Marketing and Social Influence. And it is really about how we use our voice to influence change, and change could be selling a product or a service or whatever. But again, as a Jesuit Catholic liberal arts college, we want to make sure that the future communicators of our society are doing that from an ethical perspective. And right now, there isn't that. I mean, there certainly are people who are ethical, and I think a lot of that comes from some of the journalists who have become influencers. But even journalism is being questioned right now. My very best friend's a 20-year plus journalist, and she's an influencer, but everything she does comes from the foundational principles of journalism, which is, research and non-emotion and non-opinion. It's just facts. Now, what's happened with, as you say, the instant access to influencers, and the young generations now just go straight to TikTok to search something instead of going to Google or wherever you go. And now there's all these random people out there spouting off stuff. How do you trust anything anybody says? And that is a problem I don't have an answer for, other than we just have to hopefully train people to have discernment, to ask good questions, and to fact check.
And that was going to be the next question. So do you encourage them to search multiple sources for stories? I mean, because if you're only getting your story from one, say, media outlet, I mean, you may see the world completely different. Yes. I mean, you may think we're living in a totally different world based on one channel or one streaming news source. And I will tell you that there are, at times, there's just it's hard discernment as to, hey man, this person sounds like they are telling me right down Main Street, and so does this person. And how are you coaching that discernment? I mean, discernment's a huge thing for me, and where that wisdom comes in, and sort of seeking out that truth and consistency in things. How are you encouraging your students around that?
Well, I teach a philosophy called media literacy. And so in a lot of the marketing classes, I'm going to talk about media literacy. So understanding the perspective of the media you're listening to. And I 100% tell them you need at least 2 sources for every piece of information. So if you hear something over here, go fact check it. If I read just here locally, if I read a headline on, one website, I'm going to go read the story on another one, just because nobody has time to tell the whole story. So if you really want the whole story, you've got to get multiple sources. That long-form journalism and long-form media is rare, I mean, you can read a New York Times article that's really long and it'll give you a full in-depth story, but it still has a perspective. So go read another perspective. So that is what I teach my students in general, whatever class it is, but specifically in communications and marketing, because you have to know the media sources, you have to know your audiences and what your audiences need and want to hear. And that's going down a whole nother path. But media literacy and understanding that you can't rely on one source will help you be a better citizen, part of this community in the future. So
how do we flip that around to leadership? So when we're talking about how we lead, where we come from, how we are influencing the people around us, if we're going to be an influencer in our company, I always ask our team, who is the person who's trying to match you, or who are you trying to match? We had one of our leaders say that if we're not careful, you watch people as they come into our organization, they will migrate to who they want to, their personality. They want to match up with someone who does it the way they do it. So if you've got someone who's not a high performer, they may migrate to the person who's not a high performer. Mm-hmm. So we got to be careful about who our leaders are in the organization, because we want them all to be marching towards improvement. But I think this goes back to the Nick Saban days, saying that his team, who's going to stand up and say, match me? Mm-hmm. I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be an influencer. Who's going to stand up and say, match me? And in the world of media, I actually see now this kind of changing back and forth. I'm a little scatterbrained on this, but there are news sources rising up now promoting themselves as the neutral source. Mm-hmm. They're not left or right. They're kind of just giving the facts. I don't know why we got away from just giving the facts.
Right. I agree.
Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Right.
Kind of how that goes. So let me get back on my sheet here. I told you that I couldn't stay on track. I can't.
There's so much we could talk about.
I can't stay focused. So in your experience, I'm going to put the nuts and bolts to you here. What's the one nuts and bolts leadership principle that both students and clients tend to underestimate when it comes to leadership?
Communication. I think vision and communication, like you asked me earlier about vision casting. I think when it comes to leadership, we underestimate. You can have a vision for where you want the company to go, but if you can't communicate the vision, then it's worthless. right? You as a leader of the organization have to say, here's where we're going, and here's how I think we'll get there, and here's what I need from you to help us get there. And then be open to feedback, and then, go down the path. And if the path changes, be willing to change. But somebody's got to say, here's where we're going. We're going to Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, how we get there, I don't know exactly how we're going to get there. I need everybody to be involved in that process, but we're going to Mount Kilimanjaro, And so I think communication is such an important part of leadership that that's where I think a lot of folks need some help. I mean, I don't want to get into politics, but certainly when it comes to politics, we've had leaders that are over communicators and leaders who are under communicators, and there's lots of feedback we could give to those folks. But as a leader of an organization, if you don't have a clear vision that you can communicate simply and in a way that anybody in your organization can understand it, then I think that you're not doing the job. You're not being a great leader.
You pull the words right out of my mouth. We make those 3 points. Here's where we're going. Here's how we're going to get there, and here's your part. That we communicate it that way. We just wrote our 5-year vision, strategic plan, and we put in our objectives that we want to conquer along the way to the top of the mountain. We just had on our last episode, one of our leaders talked about he was a change agent, and he was somebody he's brought in to fixer and fix things, but he's never been in that place of sustaining things. And, we talked about the difference in climbing the mountain and staying at the top of the mountain, but there's never a static place in leadership. And even in the organization, when we get there, if you stay there, you're sliding back down. If you're not growing, you're dying. So I love I love that we have people that are teaching our young leaders, because this is the nuts and bolts of leadership, and we want to talk about what leadership actually looks like, and you're helping them see that before they get out the door. I'm not sure that I ever had a course on leadership. Of course, I wasn't in college very long either. I was just there for a minute. But I can't remember a course on leadership, or, I was in the go get a job, get through with school, go get a job, go to work. That was it. Never really had anybody to, walk alongside me and say, what business do you want to start? How do we get these things going? But I'm so impressed that the colleges, particularly Spring Hill, is allowing you this latitude to help shape these young minds into the idea. Whether they pick up and run with it and start their own business, I mean, you've given them information that should be able to help them. So when we think about, being in that classroom and then you're out in the world, and, I could see you almost kind of riding 2 horses for a second, but what's the one thing that just keeps you connected? I want to stay in the classroom doing this. And then what's that one thing out there that just says, I got to keep doing this out here too?
Well, I think the answer is the same, but in a different way. So what I think keeps me going in general is I love to see people grow and accomplish things. And so in the classroom, I meet them when they're 18, 19 years old, and I can watch them as they grow and flourish, and they make mistakes along the way and they change paths, but to then see them graduate, and then beyond that, get jobs, get married, whatever it is, go to graduate school. That is what I love about teaching. It's seeing growth in those students and them realizing dreams. The same is true in business. I love helping people grow a business. I love that you have an idea, but you can't figure out how to turn it into a logo. Well, that's my job, is to talk to you about how do we make this thing real? How do we make it grow? And so if you have the vision to get to Mount Kilimanjaro, I love to help you think about how to get there and how can I help you get there. So also it's about realizing dreams. So both are realizing dreams, helping people realize dreams.
That's impressive. Again, I get caught up in listening to the answer to the question and I just lose my place. But how you go to market with that idea to the business owner or the CEO or whoever it is and say, can I come in and help you develop this idea? Is that your pitch from the marketing side? Help me develop this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think people find me. They just know that I've done work, and I think I'm really good at creative idea generation and at execution. So you said earlier, you either you create or you execute. I think I'm not saying I'm a unicorn, but I actually really enjoy both. I really love thinking big picture and what's the big vision. And I also really love making plans and checklists. I mean, I have a monthly, I have an annual, a quarterly, a monthly, a daily, weekly, and a daily checklist. I mean, I love lists.
The Checklist Manifesto.
Yes.
Our CFO is her favorite book, The Checklist Manifesto.
I am a checklist fan. Yeah. Okay. And I loved it. I will write something down after I've done it so I can check it off.
There you go. My checklist at home, and I have a list at home. I've been married for 42 years. I've always had a to-do list. I've never given my wife a to-do list. I find that fascinating. Anyway, so I want to talk about Gen Z and millennials. So for a long time, millennials kind of got a knock. They were difficult. However, that was defined. The millennial generation was difficult. How is Gen Z different? Because we got CEOs that are listening. Gen Zs are knocking on their door with their resume now. How is the Gen Z student different than the millennial?
Well, let me just start by saying every older generation thinks every younger generation is a pain in the ass. That's just the reality, right? We do. I'm Gen X, and they said bad things about us too, right? We were the slacker generation, and we didn't do anything. Well, we said the same thing about millennials, and then we say the same things about Gen Z. That's just natural. But I do think that there are differences ultimately about them, and what I'm seeing in Gen Z is it's a pendulum swing. So Gen X, we didn't have all this technology, but we were hard workers. And then the pendulum swinging, they have all the technology. Millennials kind of were the first generation raised with all the technology. And Gen Z's kind of coming back a little bit in the middle where they're saying, yes, I have access to all this technology, but I see them as wanting to relate, to be with people, to have more real experiences, to have more purpose, to know the whys around and behind things. Like they're, I think, more intentional, more curious. They also have boundaries. They are really good at setting boundaries, which as a Gen Xer who doesn't set boundaries, and I'll work 80 hours a week, they won't. And as a CEO, you have to know that they're just setting the boundaries that we should have set. There's no reason we should work 80 hours. Now, as an entrepreneur, I'm going to work 80 hours, but I got 3 businesses and teach, but that's because I'm a Gen Z, and that's what we did. We that's normal. 60 hours is minimum,
I would think that our learning from them might be, and I have some CEOs in my peer group that will, and they've even coached this, that they will tag their emails. If you're getting this email at an off hour, it's just been convenient to me. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean it's convenient for you, and you have to respond outside work hours. So those kind of things are coming from, one, I think it's respectful, but 2, I think that they're finding out about some of those boundaries, which I believe is healthy, and it could be a little restrictive because there are times when I need to work 50 or 60 hours a week. But if I'm doing that all the time, then I'm not doing my family or my business a justice. I'm actually burning out where I really need to find a way to pace. So there are sometimes you have to lean in. You have to put your foot on the gas. But it's like any other parts of business. Sometimes you got to go slow. Sometimes you can go faster. So that's good information about the Gen Z and the millennials.
Well, just one other example. There's this phrase, hustle culture. Have you heard that? The hustle culture. So last 10 years, there's this guy named Gary Vee, and he's very popular, big influencer, entrepreneurship. He's an influencer on me, and it's all about hustle, hustle, hustle. Work hard, work hard, work hard. And we are getting away from that. And this generation is saying, I don't want to hustle. Yeah, I'll hustle. They will hustle, but they don't want to be made to hustle. So yes, I'm going to come work for you, and I'll work 40 hours and I'll do good work. But why do I have to do it from 8 to 5? Why can't I do it from 9 to 6 or 7 to 3? Like flexibility is really important to them. And I think if you can give flexible and then good guidelines and good guidance, they'll get the work done. That's not the issue. They just want that flexibility.
Yeah, I want you to think about the generation, I hate to use the word gap, the generation distance from the boomer to the Gen Z. But I will tell you this, putting those young people, I love being around those young people because they help me learn words like this. And that hustle culture, I mean, I'm still in that hustle culture. As a matter of fact, I will tell you this, I'm okay if we get beat on price, but don't ever beat us on getting out hustled. Because we want to work hard to earn your business and to create value for you. And some of that comes through hustling. And if you've got young folks that are coming in that aren't interested in hustling, we're going to have a problem because part of our MO, part of the DNA of who we are is we're going to out hustle our competitor. So coaching that and showing the value, the why, part of the why. This is why we hustle when we need to hustle because this is who we are. We want to create value in and for the people we serve, which are our clients, which are our each other. So sometimes we have to hustle.
Well, to clarify my own comments, I think that's the bottom line. It's the why. I think the Gen Z doesn't want to hustle just because you said so. But if you tell me why, then I will work my tail off if it's the right why, right? If I believe in the why. So that culture fit is going to become more important as you hire, that it's the right person for the right job with the right organization. Because if they believe in the why, they'll hustle for you. But if they don't believe in the why, then they'll check out and do the bare minimum.
And we've brought up this piece about the flexibility, and we want to create some flexibility within reason, but we also don't want to sacrifice the team element of that flexibility. So, for example, our guys that are driving the forklift, they bring great value to our organization. They got to work within the hours that the forklift is being used. They don't have the flexibility to work outside those boundaries. So we want to create an environment that looks at the whole. And I think that there are times when flexibility is necessary, but also believe that we don't want to sacrifice the idea that we need to be in front of each other for the team dynamic to happen. That subject we can come back and have a whole nother podcast about, because I think that there are a lot of people that are still, as hard as this is to believe, are still unpacking from the COVID effects.
Yes.
Because COVID shoved us into the corners in a lot of subject matters that we are still unpacking from and still feeling the effects from. Lots of things that we talked about even as recently as today. So, Stacy, as we kind of wind over to the more personal part of this, tell me someone who made an impact on your leadership journey.
That's a really hard question because there's so many people. I'm going to tell you, this is going way back when I was a freshman in college. And I can't remember her name, but there was a woman who was in student life, and I got involved in student affairs. And that was the first person who had me do the Myers-Briggs test. And I remember taking that test and thinking, oh, I'm going to take this the way I'm supposed to be. And years later, I retook it, and I realized, so when I first took it, I was an ENTJ, pretty strong. But now later in life, as I've gotten to know myself better, I'm very much an INTJ, so the introvert versus extrovert. So I answered it from the perspective of I thought I needed to be extroverted, but really now knowing myself better, I'm an introvert in how I recharge. But I'm a really good extrovert. I know how to be a good extrovert. So that test back then, my freshman year, really was one of the first tools I was given to think about leadership and leadership style, and also to be reflective on my own style. And then that really was just the beginning of a 30-year journey. We just had this DISC coach come in and go through this with our senior leader group. And I actually asked the question, can the test be manipulated? And could you answer the question on your aspirational who I would like to be versus actually. And she actually said there are enough questions in there that if you tried to do that, it would throw you into like some transition, like the answers are too inconsistent. But I thought it was fascinating what she did say, though. And this hit home for me. She said the only two people in all the years that I've done this that have ever looked at their test and said, this isn't me, and actually handed it off to someone else and said, this isn't me, this is not you, was two people that had just suffered tragic personal loss. They were in such an emotional state of mind that they could not even answer the questions correctly. And it impacted me because those people come to our offices. There are people that walk in our doors that are from time to time have that sort of hurt and have that sort of loss, that they could just be off their game. And how important that was for me to be sensitive to. There are times when we need to say, hey, Stacy, is everything all right? Something, you're not acting the way that you normally would. But I wonder about what you just said, though, finding out that I was the introvert, not the extrovert, or vice versa. And is it, when you take those tests, is this a DNA thing, or is it I can evolve out of or into something else? Well, that nature nurture, right? I think it was more of a personal understanding, like self-reflection. I thought I've always been a good extrovert. I'm an only child. I've always had to be around adults. Like I've just been I know how to be an extrovert. So I thought that's who I was. But the older I got and the more I learned, I've read tons of leadership books, and I just, I do lots of self-reflection, therapy, counseling, whatever. I love all of it. I have just learned that is exhausting to me. Like I love teaching. I love it. I love doing this with you. but it's going to take a lot of energy out of me doing this. And I'm going to need to go and sit in my office for 5 minutes and just be quiet, and then I can return to myself and build my energy back up. That is, to me, what introvert extrovert is about. It's how do you recharge? And that took me some time to figure out.
So that would be a classic introvert then, if you have to go and recharge. We have people at our office, and they're on our leadership team, and they will say, I've had enough people for the day. I need a minute.
Yeah.
So I get that. There are others, though, in this conversation, it just energizes them. So I've often wondered, I know that I'm an extrovert, but I've often wondered, I think I do introvert well when I need to. And it's so I can take that time in the quiet. But I think I'm much more of a classic extrovert than introvert. When I used to drive all over the Southeast for our company, I would get so bored with myself, I'd pull in and talk to the greeter at Walmart. I just needed somebody to talk to. So Stacy, if we had a young leader here in the meeting room with us and you could give them one piece of advice on how to start their journey, I know you do this for a living. You're in the classroom with them, but you've got a listener out there that's kind of tuned in and going, okay, how do I get started on this journey? What would you tell them?
What I want for any student who comes through my classroom to take away from me is I want them to learn the love of learning. So if anybody out there, whether you've gone to college or not, or whatever, wherever you are in life, you can always learn. So listen to books, read books, listen to podcasts, love learning. That is what has changed my life, and I hope has been impacted through my students. Find a book you like and start reading. I've read so many leadership books. John Maxwell, you mentioned earlier, Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a classic. The Leadership Challenge. There's so many wonderful books out there. Just pick one and start reading. Heroic Leadership, that's a recent one I learned as a Jesuit, former JP Morgan CEO who talked about the Jesuit principles in leadership. Just read. I
would say that one of our core asks of our team, we just recently had our new employee orientation, and we always talk about this. This is what we are asking of you, and one of those 3 elements are commit to being a continuous learner, because the ideas, these concepts that come from books and reading and audios and listening and podcasts and all the different things. We're just kind of taking time to open your mind and let some of these ideas just kind of flesh around inside. Well, Stacy, it's been a joy to be with you on the podcast today. Tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to talk to you about marketing consulting. Well, the simplest would be just Google Stacy Wellborn. You'll find me. Wellborn Strategies is my marketing firm. And then Container Yard, here we are, our co-working space, and I teach at Spring Hill College. Well, it's been a great interview with Dr. Stacy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for having me. We'll be right back with a few closing thoughts. All right, what a great interview with Dr. Stacy Wellborn. I love talking to Stacy. She's got such a great outlook on how to create, how to design, how to build a plan. She's just brilliant in the way she thinks about it. I love the last piece that she dropped on us, embrace the love of learning. We talked about so many things. I've got 2 pages here of notes. We've talked about alignment, failing fast, the side hustle. I love everything about Stacy and what she's doing. I'm so proud to know people like her that are in the classroom teaching the next generation of leaders. So well done, Stacy. And we're already looking forward to our next episode. But until we meet again, tighten up.
Thank you for tuning in to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the proud employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc., where our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our community, and in our customers? Visit us at threadedfasteners.com. Thanks again for listening. This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.